Bit less. That was Donald Trump saying what he might have done differently this headline-packed week. Here with me to discuss it all is senior Trump advisor Jason Miller, Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who's also the secretary of the Democratic National Committee, CNN political commentator Andre Bauer, who supports Donald Trump, and Simone Sanders, former press secretary to Bernie Sanders. So, Jason, I'm going to start with you. A little bit less, and yet this was a tough week. I think even Trump allies would acknowledge that. He fought with this family of the fallen service member. He said Putin's not going to make a move into Ukraine, even though Putin has already done that several ways. He initially refused to endorse Speaker Ryan or Senator McCain or Senator Ayotte, although he has since endorsed them. And there were a string of high-profile Republicans getting behind Clinton, including Hewlett-Packard CEO Meg Whitman, retiring Congressman Richard Hanna, and some top advisors to Jeb Bush and Chris Christie. It's just empirically been a bad week for the Trump campaign.
First part of the week was a little bit bumpy. I'd say the back half of the week was very good for Donald Trump. So on Thursday, on Friday, yesterday in New Hampshire, Donald Trump had very good days on the campaign trail. He's focused. He knows what he needs to do in this campaign. I think we have a unified campaign. But even more so than that, I think we have a candidate that's unified with his campaign. And he's now laying out his vision. Tomorrow will be in Detroit, rolling out economic vision, talking about the differences between the candidates on national security. And I think he's focused on exactly what he needs to go and do.
Well, you said the candidate is unified with his campaign. Shouldn't that be automatic? Shouldn't the campaign and the candidate be one and the same?
People have been underestimating Donald Trump since the beginning of this. Talk about the Republican primary where folks didn't think that he would be the nominee. He's an unconventional candidate. He's not a blow-dried Washington candidate. He is a candidate who really has tapped into the American voters, tapped into that frustration. He's someone who senses that fear, and he wants to make our country safe, wants to get our economy back on track. And that's different. I mean, if we have to turn Washington on its head, then that's what he's going to do.
Okay, the thing is that all of this does have an impact on his campaign and how he is perceived. Let's go to some new poll numbers from the ABC News and Washington Post. Trump's handling of the Khan family, 73% of voters disapprove, 12% approve. Is Donald Trump qualified to serve as president? 38% say yes about Donald Trump, 61% say no. Almost the reverse number for Hillary Clinton. 60% say she is qualified, 38% say no. Does Donald Trump have a good understanding of world affairs? 72% say yes for Hillary Clinton, 25% no. 33% say yes for Donald Trump, 64% no. Those are just, and let me go to Andre here. Those are just some remarkably horrible poll numbers. I mean, this week after week of these self-inflicted wounds is really taking a toll.
Well, there are other polls, too. And when you talk about the number one and number two issue, jobs and the economy, I think the polls are exactly the opposite. You know, they say we don't reach out to millennials as a Republican Party, so I would say in the words of DJ Khaled, major key alert, Donald Trump's back on message. He's raising money. He's bringing the 10 in. He's bringing new folks in. And he's got people energized. Look at these rallies that have tens of thousands of people coming out. I haven't been polled. There's a lot of people that aren't showing up on these polls that are fed up. They want the ox out of the ditch. They want a change maker in Washington, and he is the only person talking about change in Washington.
Okay, but wait. So they want a change maker in Washington, but Donald Trump has not demonstrated that he's a change maker with the actual plan. So I'm actually looking forward to his speech in Detroit on Monday because I hope we'll hear some meat and potatoes. I think these poll numbers, while yes, polls do go up and down, I think they're startling, and there's something that folks should be paying attention to. It's demonstrating that folks do not think Donald Trump is fit to be president. Matter of fact, he's temperamentally unfit to be president. He kicked a baby out of his rally in Virginia this week. And would have kicked DJ Khaled out. Virginia is for lovers, not for haters.
Well, Madam Mayor, let me ask you, is there a risk here? Because, you know, this is just August. We don't know what's going to happen in November. Is there a risk of Democrats getting too confident here?
I think if we paid attention as much as pollsters and as much as the media does to the polling, we can get complacent. And I think there's a risk that people might not come out to vote. But we're not going to do that. This election is too important. And the poll numbers are great now. But the poll numbers that matter are the polls in November. And that's getting people out to the poll to vote. There's so much that's happening with voter suppression. Why? Because that's the only way the Republicans win. If they close the tent, reduce the tent, keep voters away from the polls, we're not going to be fooled. So all of this, you know, the bad week for Trump, the good week for Clinton, that's fine this week, but we're very focused on a grassroots game to get people to the polls. This election matters too much.
Andre, you talked about, Jason, I'll come right to you. Andre, you talked about how that's just one poll. Let's just go to another poll, battleground states, because that's the ones that Jason and the campaign honchos, when they get together, those are the ones they care about. It's not a national referendum, it's a state-by-state election. Just in some battleground states, Florida, Clinton +6, Michigan, Clinton +9, Pennsylvania, which is a key state that you guys have to win, Jason, as you know, Clinton +11, New Hampshire, Clinton +15. I know that there's a Reuters Ipsos poll that's an internet poll that you guys like to talk about, but generally speaking, that seems to be an outlier. The polls are not good for you.
So I'm going to push back on that. There are a couple of things. The single most important number to keep in mind is that 70% of the American public thinks that we're going in the wrong direction. And for Hillary Clinton to be doubling and tripling down on wanting to have this third term puts her in a real difficult spot. Case in point, on Friday, as we saw Secretary Clinton bumble and stumble, and again, tripling down on this lie on her email server.
Which we'll get to in the next
Right.
section.
I know we're coming back to that. But the fact that it reminds people immediately just how much they dislike Hillary Clinton. So not only do we have a Reuters poll showing that we're within 3 points,
But they
LA
dislike
Times
Trump
tracking,
more.
oh, just one moment. LA Times.
But
shows
that
it
is right.
within-
If you
shows
could
it
address the
within
mayor's
line.
point. Yes, voters have their issues with
the
Hillary
point-
Clinton. They have bigger issues with Donald Trump, according to these same polls.
But the point being, the elasticity of this race, can be a lot of movement real quick.
People are real
beginning of the
solid on
week,
the fact that they don't like Trump.
Beginning of the week, not as great for Donald Trump. End of the week, he is doing great. The campaign is doing strong. I know we're going to go into fundraising a little bit later, but turning out the big crowds, this is a candidate that's
like,
focused.
what
But
Okay, yeah,
here's the
in the
question.
world.
Address the,
He's
address
not
the mayor's
doing well.
point, if you would. I mean, who is he going to turn around? Because a lot of people really are set in not liking him, and I'll come to you after this, Andre.
He's going to turn around people who want to change in this country. People think we're going in the wrong direction.
He
People who
can't
think that
even
sending $400 million
convince his own
in cash to
Republicans to
Iran
support him.
is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism is terrible. People think that 3 quarters in a row of GDP growth under 2% is terrible. People who've
think
been
that
left
having
behind.
someone with his
People who have
temperament
been
in charge
left
of the
behind by this
nuclear
economy.
code is terrifying.
People might be doing okay in D.C. and New York. They're not doing okay in the rest of the country.
Well, the mayor's from Baltimore, but,
and he doesn't have a plan, as Simone
No
said.
plan, no meat and potatoes
Well,
to the plan.
I can tell you Hillary
and
Clinton's
furthermore,
plan,
when you say
which is to raise taxes.
who Donald Trump is, we can talk about Secretary Clinton's actual meat and potatoes and the plans that she actually has to build up hardworking middle-class families in this country, to
Obamacare?
address racial barriers and break down the barriers. Donald Trump is talking about building walls. So, but to your point about, though, that he's going to bring in these people they want to change. Who are these people? Are they minorities? Because I think before convention, he was polling at 0% with African Americans in this country and Latinos. Post-convention, I think he got, maybe 5% now? But you cannot win in 2016 in a presidential election without people of color in this country. So who is he pulling in? He's not pulling in millennials like myself.
I want to give Andre the last word in this, and then we're going to take
Well, I
a
would
quick break
say
and come back.
one of the bigger things that moves numbers, and all of us will agree, is money. Donald Trump hasn't been spending money. Hillary has been on the air. She's been pounding a message, and he hasn't. That's going to change now. He's raised money. And so the fact that he's been dark and she's been up heavily in these battleground states and that the numbers aren't wider is amazing. It really is.
All right.
Tens of millions of dollars.
Quick break coming up.